Baia is a sunken, ancient Roman spa town that is now the site of an underwater archaeological park where you can dive on 2,000-year-old Roman ruins, mosaic floors, and statuary, and it's pretty awesome. We are in the town of Baccoli, which is just west of Naples, Italy, and it is the site of what used to be the Roman town of Baia. Now, Baia was a spa town. It was a high-end, expensive spa town for Roman senators, aristocrats, and even emperors. And it existed here from about the year 0 through a couple hundred AD. And the reason that it was set up here was directly opposite us, on the other side of the bay over there, is a town called Pozzuoli. And this was one of the most substantial international ports for the Roman Empire during this period, the early imperial period. We're talking about the era of some of the really well-known names: Nero, Hadrian, Claudius, Julius Caesar. That's the time period we're talking about here. And right across there, Pozzuoli was the main port for bringing in grain from places like North Africa to help feed Rome and other elements of the Roman Empire. So you got a significant settlement over there. There's a major port. Porto Julius is just up this side of it. You can see some square gray buildings. They roughly correspond to where Porto Julius was. That was the commercial port. And the emperors decided that they needed a military presence here as well. And so just down around at the end of this peninsula, beyond that castle, which is, by the way, a medieval castle, they built a major Roman naval fortification, naval port, housed 300 to 400 ships, 20,000 sailors at any given time. It was a huge, huge infrastructure. Now, coming back to Baia, the reason that Baia is here is because this whole area is quite volcanically active. This whole area is sitting on top of actually a caldera, essentially a caldera supervolcano. There's a giant magma cavity about 3 kilometers below ground here, about 2 miles below ground, and it feeds a lot of geothermal vents in this area, as well as 3 or 4 dozen active and inactive volcano craters. So what the Romans saw with the thermal vents was the opportunity for thermal baths. These were a very popular pastime, a very popular way to basically spend your vacation in the Roman period, was go to the thermal baths. They had a very elaborate setup: hot rooms, warm rooms, steam rooms, cold rooms, the whole deal. And Baia got established as the premier spa destination. We're not that far from Rome. It's a bit of a trip, but it's the vacation spot you can head to from Rome. There's already a lot of infrastructure because of the port and the military base, and so Baia gets built up as essentially the Las Vegas of Rome, and major Roman dignitaries, all the way up to emperors, have villas here. What makes Baia really cool today is a lot of these high-end villas are actually buried underwater, and they're accessible via snorkel or scuba. So what happened was, when Baia was originally constructed, as you can see today, the ocean comes all the way into the shore. Originally, Baia was just behind a lake. This inner bay right here was a standalone lake, and the Romans dug a canal to connect it to the sea so that they could get access in and out more easily. And they built the town of Baia up on the hillside here. And a lot of the noble villas were built on this beautiful, like, oceanfront or lakefront, depending on which side, land that goes out into what is today the ocean. Now, I mentioned that there's a supervolcano caldera underneath here. There's a process called bradycism, wherein a magma chamber like the one here will expand or contract very slowly over time. Well, during the Roman period, this magma chamber was contracting. The lava was seeping out of it, going somewhere, and the land actually slowly sunk at the rate of a couple centimeters per year for about 400 years. And once you get to the 300s and 400s, the Romans, who had built these villas out on this land stretching into what is now the ocean, discovered that the ocean was kind of creeping up. Like, every year they come back here for vacation season, and they're like, wasn't the water wasn't quite this close to the foundation last year, was it? Well, maybe it'll go back next year. And it never did go back. And over the course of about 400 years, the land literally sunk down. The ocean didn't raise, but the ocean came in, and covered over a lot of these villas, forcing them to be abandoned by the 400s and 500s, right about the time the Roman Empire was in collapse anyway. So what we have is this fascinating town where elements of the major town structures, including some of the noble establishments up here on the hillside, as well as 3 huge thermal baths. These are like the strip of Roman Las Vegas. We have one right in here. That's actually the second one that was built. That's called the Temple of Diana today. I'm sorry, the Temple of Venus today. It has nothing to do with Venus, and it's not a temple, but early folks who came in here saw it and thought, wow, that's huge. That obviously must be a temple. It wasn't. It's a thermal bath. The very first one is actually down below. You can see a fully intact, self-contained dome down there. That was the first bath complex. And then there's another domed one back behind it, which has half collapsed in. That was the last one. That was built in the early 200s. And those were the main public attractions here. So if you didn't have your own gigantic villa with your own private thermal baths and your own fish farm, oyster farm, like these were substantial country estates essentially out here. Well, you'd come into town, you'd find a place to stay, and you'd visit the public thermal baths like that. Now, if we look out into the ocean here, you can see essentially the lake is where the marina exists today. Where all these boats are parked, that was originally the Baia lake. If we get out, you can see the point at the end of the marina there, and there are a number, half a dozen or so boats. They're not anchored, they're hooked up to buoys, and you can see white buoys out there. Those white buoys are actually dive sites that are over remains of Roman structures, villas, roads, and they're incredibly, in some ways, incredibly well preserved. You wouldn't think that something underwater for 2,000 years would still be around, much less details like intricate mosaic tile floors and even statues. But that does still exist down there. So let's hit the boat and let's go out there and let's see what we can actually get a look at.
There are a couple of dive shops and dive providers in Baccoli. We went ahead and used a dive provider called Baia, which is associated with the Subevolution dive shop here. They are basically right opposite the waterfront, so very close to the boat. Not quite close enough to carry all your gear, so they have this adorable tiny little truck that they put all your gear on to go the couple hundred yards from the shop down to the boat. The boat is a relatively small one, rigid inflatable. There's like no safety briefing. The deepest that I got on any of our dives here, and we spent 3 days over 6 different dive sites, was 12 feet. And as you can see in the background, we are very close to the port. So pretty much the emergency procedure is swim to shore and get yourself a Prosecco if anything goes wrong. Yeah, super easy, super short trip out to the dive sites. The water for us was, according to my records, 74 degrees Fahrenheit. The outdoor weather was around 90. It was hot. We were there in August, but the water was still relatively cold. Now, I think that's a little colder than it normally gets in this area in August, but that's what we had for our diving. Note that Baia, at least, also runs snorkelers. So there was one site where our depth was only 6 feet. And so we were kind of bumping into and fighting around snorkelers on the same site. And hey, if you're not a diver, or if someone with you doesn't enjoy diving but wants to do some snorkeling, there are definitely some sites here that are snorkel friendly. So without too much further ado, we're in the water. It is, by the way, generally pretty poor visibility. This is in a harbor. It's shallow water. There's a lot of muck around. So don't expect glorious visibility. Expect something kind of like this, but it's still worth it because of what you can see down there. All right, the coolest single thing, I think, for most people on the bottom is going to be the mosaic tile flooring. So the Romans did a lot of mosaic tile floors. You can see some like these 2 examples in the archaeological park above ground, but the same things were being put into the villas that are now sunken. And so they have actually survived for about 2,000 years underwater. And a big part of that, the reason that they survived, is that they were covered by sand and gravel on the bottom. So when you go down, your dive guide will sweep away the dirt and debris from whatever tile floors happen to be on your particular dive site so that you can take a look and admire them for a few minutes while you're diving, and then before the dive ends, the guide will come back and sweep the sand and gravel back over the floors. That protects them from sunlight, which protects them from the growth of algae, which would deteriorate their condition over time. So this one here is one of the two most famous. It's the fish mosaic. It's actually kind of cool to see fish swimming across the fish floor mosaic. Obviously, this is just part of one of the huge villas. And this tile floor, it's a huge floor, and there are just some specific elements of it that your guide will typically uncover. It would be a lot of work to uncover the whole thing, although it would be very impressive to see. So they kind of go through and get some of the highlights. This one, the fish, there's some other animals elsewhere on the mosaic, like these little birds. I would say the best dive site to go to for mosaic tile floors is the Villa Protiro. That's where this particular one is. This is one of the other really famous ones there. It's the gladiator mosaic. So you have a couple of Roman wrestlers here engaged in, well, Roman wrestling. So another just amazingly preserved tile, mosaic tile floor. It's cool to see these above ground, but they tend to be subject to a lot more wear and tear above ground, and the ones here in Baia were really well preserved by being covered over with water. It's kind of a fortuitous accident that the chemical composition of the mortar and cement that was used here in Baia had the right elements to essentially make it waterproof. It's a cement that the Romans used to build docks and jetties, and because that's what was available, they just used it for the construction of the above ground buildings here at Baia as well, and that's the reason that a lot of this survives, still adhered to itself. So that's another cool geometric decorative mosaic floor. There are a whole bunch of them here. A few of them have color panels. I'm just giving you some of the real highlights. Again, you can see our dive guide here sweeping away some of the dirt and debris so that we can get a clean look at this. Just really, really cool. The sort of thing that you do not expect to see and normally do not see underwater. Now, these have been the fancy floors, but not everything was as fancy. There are a wide variety of other conditions, other types of mosaic down there as well. So here's one that's not quite as clean. It's also not quite in as good a condition, but was originally colored, which is kind of cool. You don't normally see that. There are plenty of granite and marble floors as well. And apparently, after we did our visit just recently in 2024, they discovered just a really gorgeous composite granite or marble, colored marble floor. But we'll get into that because we didn't see it. You can find individual tiles lying on the bottom here as well. Here's another style of interesting floor, so not nearly as expensive or fancy as the really neat designs, but there's a little bit of everything. You normally see the highlights of the fish and the gladiators, but there are a lot of different floors to see, and it's, I think, definitely worth taking the time to go to a bunch of different dive sites to see the different variety that is here. But again, if you just want to see the best, the real highlights, I would highly recommend Villa Portiro, specifically the west side, has some of the best mosaic floors, so don't miss out on that one.
So the rooms that we are seeing underwater, the walls are all long gone, but we have examples up here in the surviving ruins of what was in part Julius Caesar's palace in Baia, showing some of the, a similar style of room to what we're looking at underwater with the same sort of mosaic tile floor. So here we have a room that's 10 to 12 feet square, right, 12 feet square, with a really cool, complex mosaic tile floor design, bunch of different stylistic elements. We have actually faces here in the corners. There's a really good one over in that corner. Yeah, that one's quite well preserved, but this is essentially exactly the same as what we're seeing underwater.
One of the other really cool things you can see at Villa Protiro is a thermal bath, or the remnants of one. So here's an example above ground of the way that the Romans built these. They would run heated steam underneath the floor. So you'd have a series of pillars holding up a subfloor that would be warmed by steam that's heated in a separate room. Well, here underwater, we can actually see the remains of those pillars. This was a pretty large steam bath room, and right here you can see the base of all of those subfloor supporting pillars. Just off to the left is the entryway. There we go. I believe that's where the steam would have come into the room. And then we have right over here, you can see actually some of the subflooring is still intact right there at the edge of the wall. And circling around the room, we have some more of the architecture still there. And here's a different view. This is the same room, just a different pass through. It gives you another different view of some of the subflooring. So the amount of architecture that really is still intact here underwater is pretty impressive, considering it's been down here for almost 2 millennia. One of the other cool things our dive guide did was actually dump some air into that surviving subflooring. So originally the air would not have come up through all of those, but you can see that subflooring's open and it's venting there because it's very old. Sorry, did I say the mosaic floors were the coolest part? No, that's probably not true. Actually, the coolest part is the Nymphaeum. This is part of a villa built by Emperor Claudius, and a Nymphaeum was like an artificial indoor cave that was used for banquets, feasts, having guests, and it was lined with statues on either side, sort of an oblong or a long rectangular room. Well, in the 1980s, archaeologists started excavating this area of the Baia site, and they started finding statues. Now, the statues you see here are reproductions. They went ahead and took the originals out. They're in the museum in the Baia castle, but they replaced them with reproductions of what they had found. This, in particular, this is there's a half-buried statuary scene at the far end of the Nymphaeum, and it recreates an element from the Odyssey, where Odysseus is getting Polyphemus drunk. And unfortunately, not all of this survives, and what was there was in fairly bad condition. But these are the recreations of the actual statues they pulled out. And they went ahead and put these reproduction statues back on the site, right where they were found, so that divers today, like us, could take a look at them and like get a feel for what this site looked like when the archaeologists started working on it. And it is incredibly cool. It's kind of creepy. It is... our visibility, as you can tell from the video here, was really quite poor, and this is in all of 6 feet of water. So this is 2 meters of water is all. When they found these statues originally, they'd all fallen over, by the way. So the reproductions are standing up straight, but you can actually see on the back, yeah, there you go. You can see on the back, they've got some bracketry bolting them in place so that they don't fall over again. And it's just really cool to swim the circumference of what used to be a room and check out the statues. And by the way, the statues are a big part of how they identified this as being specifically Claudius Villa, because some of these specifically represent and can be identified as relatives of Emperor Claudius. So just super cool. Unfortunately, as far as we could tell, the original statues are still in storage in the museum. One of the locals we talked to said they have been in storage or in restoration for like 25 years, and they're not on display now. So I guess if you want to see what they look like, really your only option is to come here and see the reproductions underwater in their original site. If it's not a little too creepy for you to swim up on these guys kind of coming out of the murk. On the slightly more mundane side, we have a lot of walls and columns and, interestingly, door lintels that are still visible underwater. So some of them were made out of small brick cemented together, like you can see here. We have a couple pieces of broken column there that, as you can see, were also made out of small brick cemented together. Those are pretty cool. That's not really the most common sort of architectural remains that you'll see at Baia. What we have a lot more of are large, heavy-duty foundational walls and a surprising number of actually column bases and column fragments. So you can see one here in the front and one in the back. This is a four-cornered room that still has the remains of pillars sitting up there. Those are cool to see. Again, you can't go into this expecting to see full-fledged villas that you're going to swim through. These are ruins. These are 2,000-year-old ruins, but what you have are the remains of walls. That was actually a pipe carrying water. That's really cool to have survived. This is an archaeological park, by the way. It opened as, well, it was first discovered in the 1940s via aerial photography that revealed a lot of these remains underwater in the bay. This one's neat, by the way. This is the first of a whole series of columns. So the column base is solid down there, and then they started building it up out of brick. And this is just the first in a whole line of columns that was originally along a pathway, a long entryway into the house or in a garden. Sorry, I don't remember exactly, but the archaeological dig here began in the 1980s and continues to this day. They're still excavating, still finding really interesting stuff at Baia today. And it was the whole site was designated an underwater archaeological reserve protected park in 2002. And so diving here is done with permits from the archaeological authorities, from the government. Let's see. So here's another example of just some different surviving materials. We have some red tile there. We have some, I believe that's marble flooring as well. And then what's really cool here, this is the sort of thing that the archaeologists are finding as they slowly and carefully excavate. If we look down at the corner here, we have a surviving piece of marble flooring that actually has a couple of flowers relief carved into it. That's really cool. You know, again, the sort of thing that you don't normally see on the bottom of the ocean. Neat element here, just some surviving steps. Nothing is more than a couple feet tall here. Some of the tallest stuff is in the 3 to 4 foot range. Most of it is 1 to 2 feet off the ground. Here's a really cool bit. We've got a surviving piece of ornamental marble with, sorry about the overexposure there, but with the remains of the little face carved into it down at what would have been the foot of this piece that's now just under the surface. Here's a cool example of a marble door lintel. You can see on the left side there's an excavated, well, on both sides actually, there are excavated square holes, and those were for doors to stand in. We have another example of that here. Note the round hole there on the left side. That's where the door would have pivoted to open and close over this marble lintel. And we got actually one more really cool example. This was a set of double doors that I believe had rollers on the bottom to allow them to open and close smoothly, and you can still see the tracks for those door rollers in the marble that survives here on the bottom. And this is part of a much larger piece, a much larger surviving element of a building that keeps going for a surprising distance. There is aquatic life here. It's not desolate, but you don't come here for the fish and the wildlife. You come here for the archaeology. That being said, we did see a couple of cool things. We had this octopus hiding away inside the rocks. These guys are apparently not super rare here. We also saw this little spotted eel hanging out also under a rock. And then, you know, a small assortment of various fish, as you've seen in all the other footage so far. So there's life around. But, you know, we're going to have more on this segment in other dive location videos. Baia's not the place for fish. There's not really any lack of things to do when you're not diving if you're diving at Baia. You're, of course, in the heart of Italy. The town of Baccoli has a lot of archaeological ruins just right in and around the town. So the bath complexes are open for tourism. Here's, in fact, one of the thermal bath rooms in a much larger complex, but several of the really large public baths are open. There were 3 major ones here in Baia, in the original Roman town, and the modern town of Baccoli is essentially built in and on top of the ancient Roman town of Baia. So these ruins and several other sets are within easy walking distance if you're staying in Baccoli. Like there's a lot to do here. Now, I mentioned the baths. I actually filmed a bit in one of them.
Above ground, this is probably the coolest single structure in the entire site here. The complex outside, the Imperial Palace complex, is massive and incredibly impressive. This is the Temple of Mercury, because it's so huge it must be a temple. Well, it's not a temple. This was the Frigidarium. This was the cold bath section of the thermal bath complex, the first thermal bath complex built here in Baia. Now, this has been flooded because the land sunk, and you can see from these arches at the side that the level I'm standing at is not the original floor. It's well above the original floor. And this originally wouldn't have been an open pool. It would have had pathways and little cold bath pools around throughout the room. I believe this is, second to the Pantheon, the largest surviving freestanding dome of antiquity. It's still here. This hasn't been reconstructed. This is how it was built. Originally would have been tiled, so it's not in great condition, but the whole building's still here. It is hot and muggy outside, and it's really quite delightful in here. The four windows up on the top give a really nice cross breeze. The oculus lets in light to light this whole room that would otherwise be pretty dark and dingy. And frankly, it's really tempting to just dive into the water, but I'll resist.
A few other things to point out quickly, though. There is the medieval castle, the Aragon Castle of Baia, built over Caesar's Villa. That is now 3 levels of archaeological museum. That's the Phlegrean Fields Archaeological Museum, which houses all sorts of stuff from Baia and from the whole area. The port across the bay, this was the heartland of Rome. There was all sorts of stuff going on here. So this is a fantastic museum. It's a little bit of a walk from downtown Baccoli, but doable if you're up to it. And then a little farther away is the Piscina Mirabilis, which is a absolutely massive 50-foot deep, like 75 by 82-foot water cistern that was dug by Augustus to hold water for the naval base. This thing will hold about 3.25 million gallons of water. It's an amazing thing to get into, and you can walk right down into it. So lots to do in the area. Baia is, of course, located in the Italian little village town of Baccoli. Baccoli is not an international tourism destination, but it is a place that survives largely on Italian tourist income. So there are a lot of little restaurants, lots of hotels, not much in the way of huge commercial tourist infrastructure. Plan to have at least a little bit of Italian that you can speak. Some people will speak English, but a lot won't. A lot of really good food. But again, don't expect that you're going to some place that's designed for international tourism. Getting into Baia is really quite easy. This is a site that's about 30 minutes west of Naples, so easy way to do it is just fly into Naples and either get a taxi or arrange for a ride with the hotel that you reserve in Baccoli. Not an uncommon thing for people to get there by way of Naples. So pretty easy. The Naples airport is a southern Italian chaotic nightmare in our experience. The traffic is chaotic Italian nightmare, which is, hey, fun if you're into that sort of thing. Once you get into Baccoli, there are lots of small hotels to choose from. No really huge ones, but that's fine. The service is really nice. The people are nice. Lots of little restaurants. If you like seafood, you're in for a treat. There is a ton of great seafood. Of course, they use the euro. We had no trouble using credit cards anywhere. The biggest hassle we had was actually getting to and from our dive shop and hotel. It was a long enough walk. It was I think a mile and a half from the hotel to the dive shop. There aren't any real dive resorts here, but we were using taxis each morning to get to and from the hotel. And every day, well, they were never on time. They were either early or late. And one day they just didn't show up at all. And so our hotel manager very generously and a little frighteningly took us one at a time from the hotel down to the dive shop on his scooter so that we wouldn't miss the boat leaving.
We had a really great time here. The diving was awesome. It's super easy diving if you're a novice diver. The depths are very shallow. A big thanks to Baia for offering this, making it easy for English speakers. Like I said, we had a great time. If this is something that you're interested in doing, definitely check them out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.